Amazing viewers, before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. The Forgotten Vessel. The U.S. Resolute floated quietly through the void of space, its weathered hull gleaming faintly under the distant starlight. For years, it had been a forgotten relic of the fleet, assigned to patrolling the least active sectors of space. Most captains would have seen it as a punishment, an exile to obscurity. But Captain Elias Monroe saw it differently. To him, the ship had a soul, and in its layers of outdated systems and forgotten capabilities, he saw potential. The Resolute had once been part of the Vanguard-class experimental program, designed to test unconventional technologies decades before. Modern doctrine had dismissed it as inefficient and obsolete, its systems considered outdated in the face of newer, sleeker ships. But Monroe, with his weathered uniform and quiet determination, believed there was more to it. He had spent countless nights poring over the ship's original design files, uncovering the reasoning behind every unusual decision. On the bridge, the atmosphere was calm but focused. The crew was a mix of young recruits and veterans who had fallen out of favor with command, sent here as a career dead end. But under Monroe's leadership, they had found something unexpected, a sense of purpose. They weren't just keeping an old ship running. They were learning to master it. First Officer Layla Grant walked up to Monroe, holding a datapad. "Captain, engineering reports that the reactor is running at 93% efficiency. For a ship this old, that's almost unheard of." Monroe allowed himself a small smile. "That's not just the reactor, Layla. That's Roberts and her team working miracles down there. Tell her to keep an eye on the plasma flow. This old girl has quirks, but she rewards those who pay attention." Grant nodded and returned to her station, leaving Monroe to gaze out at the stars. The Resolute wasn't just a ship to him. It was a challenge, a mystery waiting to be solved. He had a theory, one he hadn't shared with anyone yet. The Vanguard-class ships were never meant to compete with the sleek efficiency of modern vessels. They were built for something different, something extraordinary. But before the designers could fully realize their potential, the program had been canceled, leaving ships like the Resolute to fade into obscurity. Suddenly, the comm station buzzed. "Captain," said Lieutenant Parker, the communications officer, "we're receiving an encrypted message from Fleet Command. It's marked urgent." Monroe turned toward Parker, his expression sharpening. "Patch it through to my ready room." As the door slid shut behind him, Monroe activated the holo display. The image of Admiral Tessa Devereaux appeared, her face drawn with worry. "Captain Monroe," she began without preamble, "we have a situation. Long-range sensors have detected an unidentified fleet entering the Helios sector. Their numbers are significant." Monroe frowned. "Pirates don't gather in numbers that would worry command. Who are they?" Devereaux hesitated. "We believe it's the Concordant, a coalition of alien species we've had uneasy relations with. Their technology is unlike anything we've seen before. They've already overwhelmed 3 of our forward outposts. Fleet Command is mobilizing, but we're taking heavy losses." Monroe's stomach tightened. The Concordant had been a name whispered in strategy briefings, a hypothetical threat that most dismissed as unlikely to ever materialize. Now, it was here. "What's my assignment, Admiral?" he asked, his voice steady. Devereaux's expression softened slightly. "We need the Resolute to evacuate civilian outposts in the nearby sectors. I know it's not glamorous, but every life saved matters." Monroe nodded. "Understood. We'll begin immediately." As the transmission ended, Monroe leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The Concordant's arrival was a game-changer, and the fleet's modern ships were struggling against their advanced technology. But Monroe couldn't shake the feeling that the Resolute might hold the key to something important, something everyone else had overlooked. Returning to the bridge, Monroe briefed his crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have our orders. We'll be evacuating civilians from the frontier outposts. This isn't a combat mission, but I expect everyone to stay sharp. The Concordant isn't far behind." The crew sprang into action, their training kicking in. As the Resolute plotted its course to the nearest outpost, Monroe couldn't help but glance at the engineering readouts. He had spent years collecting data on the ship's systems, and recent developments with the Concordant had triggered a theory. The Resolute's unconventional design might not just be a relic of the past. It could be humanity's secret weapon. Whispers of potential. The U.S. Resolute glided toward the first outpost, its engines humming with a steady rhythm that belied the ship's age. The bridge crew worked in sync, carrying out Monroe's orders with quiet efficiency. They had no idea what they were about to encounter, but the weight of the mission was clear. Civilian lives were at stake, and time was running out. As the ship entered the outer perimeter of Outpost 47, Monroe's sharp eyes scanned the data feed from the sensors. The outpost was a small mining colony built on the surface of an asteroid, its facilities weathered from years of exposure to cosmic debris. The Resolute's comm system crackled to life as the colony administrator's voice broke through the static. "Thank goodness you've arrived, Captain. We've been monitoring the Concordant fleet's movements. They're not far from here. We've started the evacuation, but we need more time." Monroe's jaw tightened. "We'll buy you that time. Get your people to the landing platforms and prepare for transport. My crew will assist you." He turned to his first officer, Layla Grant. "Organize away teams to help with the evacuation." "Roberts," he said, addressing the chief engineer over the comm, "prep the ship to take on additional passengers. We're pushing the capacity limits on this run." Grant nodded and began coordinating the efforts. Within minutes, shuttles from the Resolute descended to the asteroid's surface, carrying teams of officers to assist the miners and their families. The clock was ticking, and every second counted. A troubling revelation. While the evacuation was underway, Monroe retreated to the ship's engineering bay. Chief Engineer Mary Roberts was poring over a data pad, her silver-streaked hair tied back in a no-nonsense manner. She looked up as Monroe entered, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "What's the status, Mary?" he asked, his voice low. "We're stable for now," she replied, gesturing to the glowing power core at the center of the room. "But the systems are showing some unusual fluctuations. It's nothing critical, but it's strange." Monroe studied the readouts on the nearby monitor. The power core, a relic of the Vanguard program, was performing beyond expectations, something it had been doing ever since he took command of the ship. Most captains would have dismissed it as luck, but Monroe knew better. "What kind of fluctuations?" he pressed. Roberts hesitated before answering. "It's like the core is adapting to the energy demands in ways it shouldn't be able to. I've run simulations, and it looks like the more we push it, the more efficient it becomes." Monroe's mind raced. This wasn't the first time he'd seen the ship behave in ways that defied conventional wisdom. The Vanguard-class ships had been designed for flexibility and power, but their capabilities had never been fully tested before the program was scrapped. Now, with the Concordant threat looming, those forgotten designs might hold the key to survival. "I need you to keep a close eye on this," Monroe said. "If the Resolute can handle more than we've been led to believe, we need to know exactly where those limits are, and how far we can push them." Roberts nodded, her expression resolute. "You've got it, Captain. If this ship has any surprises left, we'll find them." A glimpse of the enemy. Back on the bridge, Lieutenant Parker called out from the comm station. "Captain, we've picked up a Concordant scout ship on long-range sensors. It's heading this way." Monroe's heart sank. The Concordant were faster and better armed than any ship in the fleet, including the Resolute. If they found the outpost before the evacuation was complete, the results would be catastrophic. "Helm," he ordered, "plot and intercept course. Let's keep them away from the colony as long as we can." Grant turned to him, her brow furrowed. "Captain, the Resolute isn't equipped to take on a concordant vessel. What's the plan?" Monroe's lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't need to defeat them. We just need to delay them. Use the asteroid field for cover and make them chase us. If we're lucky, we'll buy the colony enough time to get everyone off-world." The crew moved quickly, preparing for the encounter. Monroe felt the tension in the air as the Resolute changed course, heading straight for the scout ship. This wasn't what the ship was designed for, or at least, not what modern command believed it was designed for. But Monroe had a feeling the Resolute was about to prove itself in ways no one expected. A dangerous gamble. The scout ship appeared on the main view screen, a sleek, angular vessel bristling with advanced weaponry. It was smaller than a concordant battleship, but still far more dangerous than the Resolute. "They've spotted us," Parker said grimly. "They're locking weapons." "Evasive maneuvers," Monroe ordered. "Engage the shields and prepare for return fire." The Resolute shuddered as the first volley of energy blasts struck its shields. Modern ships would have crumbled under the assault, but the Resolute's experimental shield array absorbed the energy, redirecting it to the power core. The crew exchanged astonished glances as the readings spiked. "Captain," Roberts said over the comm, her voice tinged with excitement. "The shields just absorbed their attack and fed it into the core. We're running at 110% power efficiency." Monroe's eyes narrowed. "Then let's see what we can do with that power. Target their weapons array and fire a low-yield torpedo. Let's test their defenses." The torpedo shot forward, striking the scout ship's shields. To the crew's surprise, the impact caused a ripple effect, temporarily destabilizing the enemy's defenses. "They're recalibrating their shields," Gramp reported. "Looks like they weren't expecting that." Monroe allowed himself a small, grim smile. The Resolute's outdated systems might just be its greatest strength. Unlike modern ships, it didn't rely on precision or efficiency. It relied on brute force and adaptability. And against an enemy like the Concordant, that unpredictability could be their advantage. Time to prove themselves. The battle continued as the Resolute darted through the asteroid field, using the terrain to its advantage. The scout ship pursued relentlessly, but the Resolute's unconventional tactics kept it at bay. Each time the Concordant fired, the Resolute absorbed the energy and redirected it, using it to power its own attacks. "Captain," Parker said, her voice steady despite the chaos, "the colony reports that the evacuation is nearly complete. They need 5 more minutes." Monroe nodded. "Then we give them 5 minutes. Helm, keep us moving. Weapons, focus on keeping them off balance. Don't let them get a clean shot." The crew worked together like a well-oiled machine, executing Monroe's orders with precision. The ship groaned under the strain, but it held together, its power core humming with an almost unnatural vitality. For the first time, Monroe felt a glimmer of hope. The Resolute might not be a match for a full Concordant fleet, but in this moment, it was proving that it still had a role to play. As the evacuation ships launched from the colony, Monroe gave the order to retreat. The Resolute broke away from the asteroid field, leaving the Concordant scout ship behind. They had bought the colony the time it needed, and they had learned something valuable in the process. Back on the bridge, Monroe looked at his crew. They were tired but victorious, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and pride. "Well done, everyone," he said. "But this is just the beginning. The Concordant isn't going to stop, and neither are we. The Resolute has more to offer than anyone realized, and it's up to us to show the fleet what this old ship can really do." The crew nodded, their resolve unshaken. They had faced the enemy and come out stronger, and they knew the road ahead would be even more challenging. But with Monroe at the helm and the Resolute at their side, they were ready to face whatever came next. Uncovering the past, the Resolute sailed through the void of space, its engines humming steadily as the crew recovered from their tense encounter with the Concordant scout ship. The asteroid field was behind them, and the evacuees from Outpost 47 were now safely on their way to a designated refuge. But there was no time for celebration. Monroe had a burning question that needed answers. In his quarters, Monroe sat at his desk, poring over the data they had gathered during the skirmish. The Resolute had performed beyond anyone's expectations, absorbing energy attacks and using them to power its counteroffensive. The shields, the power core, the weapons, all of it had worked together in ways that modern ships couldn't replicate. But why? What was it about the Resolute that made it so different? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called. Chief Engineer Mary Roberts stepped inside, holding a datapad. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Captain," she said, setting the pad on his desk. "You need to see this." Monroe picked up the pad and scanned the data. It was an analysis of the Resolute's shield harmonics during the battle. The energy patterns were unlike anything he had seen before, shifting and adapting in real time to counter the Concordant's advanced weapons. "This is incredible," he murmured. "The shields didn't just block their attacks. They adapted to them." Roberts nodded. "Exactly. And it gets better. I cross-referenced these patterns with the old Guardian program files we retrieved from the outpost. The Resolute wasn't just designed as a testbed for experimental technology. It was built to counter advanced alien threats. The designers anticipated that we might face enemies like the Concordant one day." Monroe leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The Resolute had been dismissed as a relic, but it was becoming clear that this ship held secrets no one in the modern fleet fully understood. "Is there more?" he asked. Roberts hesitated. "There is, but it's unusual." The Guardian program files mention something called the Adaptive Energy Matrix. It's a system that's supposed to let the ship learn from its environment and improve its performance over time. The files suggest it was never fully operational, but based on what we've seen, I think the Resolute is using it. Monroe's eyebrows shot up. "The ship is learning." "It looks that way," Roberts said. "But we need more data to confirm it." Digging deeper, Monroe called an emergency meeting with his senior staff in the briefing room. The air was thick with tension as the officers gathered around the table, their faces illuminated by the holographic display at the center. Roberts began the briefing, explaining her findings about the ship's systems and the adaptive energy matrix. As she spoke, Monroe watched his officers' reactions. Some were skeptical, others intrigued, but all of them understood the stakes. The bottom line, Roberts concluded, is that the Resolute is more than just an old training ship. It's a weapon, one that was designed for a fight like this. Lieutenant Layla Grant, the first officer, frowned. If this ship was so advanced, why was the Guardian program scrapped? Why didn't the fleet keep developing this technology? Roberts shrugged. It's hard to say. The files suggest that the program was shut down because of budget cuts and shifting priorities. The fleet decided to focus on efficiency and mass production, and the Guardian ships didn't fit that model. Grant looked at Monroe. "Captain, what's the plan? If this ship really has the potential to fight the Concordant, do we take it back to command? Or do we act on our own?" Monroe leaned forward, his expression grim. "Command doesn't trust this ship. If we report what we found, they'll bury it in bureaucracy while the Concordant continues their advance. We don't have time for that." He paused, meeting each officer's gaze in turn. The Resolute has already proven it can hold its own against the Concordant. If there's even a chance that this ship can make a difference, we owe it to everyone who's fighting out there to try. But we'll need to push the ship, and ourselves, further than we ever have before. The room was silent for a moment. Then Grant spoke. "I'm with you, Captain. Whatever it takes." The rest of the officers nodded, their resolve clear. The ghost of New Dawn. The next step was to uncover more about the adaptive energy matrix and its capabilities. Monroe ordered a course set for New Dawn Station, an abandoned research facility from the Guardian program era. If there were any answers to be found, they would be there. As the Resolute approached the station, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The station loomed in the darkness like a forgotten relic, its hull scarred by decades of neglect. It had been decommissioned years ago, and most of its systems were offline. Docking complete, Grant reported as the Resolute latched onto the station. Life support is functional, but barely. Monroe led a small team aboard the station, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled stale. It was a place frozen in time, a monument to the fleet's abandoned ambitions. They made their way to the central control room, where Monroe and Roberts began searching the station's databanks. The files were fragmented and corrupted, but they managed to recover a few key pieces of information about the adaptive energy matrix. It was designed to evolve, Roberts explained, scrolling through the files. The matrix was supposed to analyze enemy tactics and develop countermeasures in real time. But the fleet never figured out how to stabilize it. They said it was too unpredictable. Unpredictable is exactly what we need right now, Monroe said. Can we access the system logs? Roberts nodded and brought up the final test reports from the Guardian program. The logs revealed that the adaptive energy matrix had been activated during a series of simulated battles, and that it had performed far beyond expectations. This system could turn the tide, Monroe said, his voice filled with determination. But we'll need to reactivate it. Awakening the Resolute. Back aboard the Resolute, Monroe and Roberts worked tirelessly to integrate the recovered data into the ship's systems. It was a risky move. Activating the adaptive energy matrix could destabilize the ship's core or overload its systems. But Monroe knew they didn't have a choice. "Are we ready?" he asked as Roberts made the final adjustments. She nodded, her hand steady despite the gravity of the moment. "Ready as we'll ever be." Monroe took a deep breath. "Do it." Roberts entered the command, and the ship shuddered as the matrix came online. Lights flickered, and the hum of the power core grew louder. For a moment, Monroe thought they had pushed the ship too far, but then the system stabilized. "The matrix is active," Roberts reported, her voice tinged with awe. "And it's already analyzing our systems. Captain, I think the Resolute just woke up." Monroe stared at the glowing displays, a sense of both wonder and anticipation coursing through him. The ship that no one believed in had just become something far more powerful than anyone had imagined. "We've got what we need," he said, his voice firm. "Now let's take the fight to the Concordant." Into the fire. The Resolute was no longer just an old training ship. With the adaptive energy matrix active, the ship's systems felt alive in a way Monroe and his crew had never experienced before. The once quiet hum of the ship now carried an undercurrent of power and potential. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a weapon, ready to be unleashed. Monroe stood on the bridge, watching as the glowing displays updated with streams of data. The Matrix was analyzing everything. The ship's systems, the concordant battle reports, and even the star charts. It was as though the Resolute was preparing itself for the challenges ahead. "Captain," Roberts said from the engineering console, her voice a mix of awe and apprehension, "the Matrix is already optimizing our power distribution. We're getting 20% more output from the core without any additional strain." Monroe nodded. "What about the shield harmonics?" "The Matrix has identified a frequency that should destabilize concordant shields," Roberts replied. "It's untested, but if it works, it'll give us a serious advantage." Monroe turned to his first officer, Layla Grant. "How's the crew holding up?" Grant smiled faintly. "Nervous but ready. They know what's at stake, and they trust you, and the ship." Monroe felt a swell of pride. His crew had come a long way from the days of routine training drills and low-priority patrols. They were a team now, bonded by the challenges they had faced and the secrets they had uncovered about their ship. The battle for New Haven. The Resolute emerged from hyperspace near New Haven, the largest human colony in the sector. The planet's orbit was a chaotic battlefield, with concordant ships swarming over the remnants of Earth's fleet. Modern human warships, sleek and efficient, were being torn apart by the alien invaders' superior technology. Monroe's heart tightened at the sight. He had known the situation would be dire, but seeing it firsthand was another matter. "Sensor readings," he ordered. Green, the sensor officer, worked quickly. "The Concordant fleet is using a wedge formation, focusing their firepower on our ship's weak points. Their flagship is coordinating the attack. It's heavily shielded and armed to the teeth." Monroe studied the display. The Concordant flagship was the key. If they could take it out, the rest of the fleet might falter. But getting close enough to attack would be nearly impossible for a modern ship. The Concordant's shields were impenetrable to conventional weapons. The Resolute, however, was anything but conventional. "Lieutenant Thompson," Monroe said, addressing the weapons officer, "prepare the shield destabilization burst. Target the flagship's coordinates, but don't fire until I give the order." "Aye, sir," Thompson replied, his hand steady on the controls. Breaking the wedge, the Resolute moved into the battle, its engines burning brightly as it accelerated toward the Concordant formation. Other human ships noticed the old training vessel and tried to warn it off. "Resolute, this is Sovereign. What are you doing? Fall back and regroup," came a transmission from one of the fleet commanders. Monroe replied calmly, "Sovereign, we're engaging. Trust us." The Resolute weaved through the debris field, dodging enemy fire with a grace that belied its age. The adaptive energy matrix was working in overdrive, analyzing the trajectories of incoming attacks and adjusting the ship's movements in real time. "Shields holding at 85%, Roberts reported. "The matrix is adapting to their weapons faster than they can adjust." As they closed in on the Concordant wedge, the alien ships turned their attention to the Resolute, their weapons lighting up the void with deadly precision. "Now would be a good time to show them what we've got," Grant said, her tone tight but determined. "Agreed," Monroe said. "Thompson, fire the destabilization burst." Thompson hit the controls, and the Resolute's shields flared brightly. A wave of energy rippled outward, invisible to the naked eye, but devastating to the Concordant systems. The nearest enemy ships staggered as their shields flickered and failed. "It's working," Green called out. "Their shields are destabilizing." "Target their engines," Monroe ordered. "We're not here to destroy. We're here to disable." The Resolute's weapons fired with pinpoint accuracy, crippling several Concordant ships without completely destroying them. The alien formation began to break apart as confusion spread through their ranks. The flagship. With the Concordant wedge disrupted, the Resolute turned its attention to the flagship. The massive vessel loomed ahead, its sleek hull bristling with weapons and defenses. It was the heart of the enemy fleet, and Monroe knew this would be the ultimate test for his ship and crew. "Roberts, can we handle the energy load for a focused shield burst?" Monroe asked. Roberts hesitated. "It's risky. The core can handle it, but if the matrix overloads, we could lose shields entirely." Monroe nodded. "We don't have a choice. Prepare the burst." The Resolute closed in on the flagship, dodging heavy fire as it approached. The Concordant commander seemed to realize the threat and concentrated their firepower on the old ship. "Shields at 60%, Roberts reported. "We won't last long under this kind of fire." "Hold steady," Monroe said, his voice calm despite the tension. The Resolute reached optimal range, and Monroe gave the order. "Fire the focused burst." The ship's shields glowed brighter than ever before, and a lance of energy shot forward, striking the flagship's shield generator. The alien vessel shuddered as its shields collapsed. "We've got a breach," Green shouted. "Their shields are down." "Thompson, target their weapon systems. Let's even the playing field," Monroe commanded. The Resolute's weapons struck true, disabling the flagship's primary weapons and leaving it vulnerable. The Concordant fleet hesitated, their confidence shaken by the loss of their most powerful ship. A turning point. As the battle raged on, other human ships began to rally around the Resolute, inspired by its success. The old training vessel had shown that the Concordant could be beaten, and the fleet's morale soared. "Incoming transmission from the Sovereign," Green said. "Put it through," Monroe replied. "Resolute, this is Admiral Hayes. Whatever you just did, it's working. We're regrouping and pushing the Concordant back. Keep it up." Monroe allowed himself a small smile. "Understood, Admiral. Let's finish this." The Resolute continued to fight, using its unique capabilities to disrupt the Concordant fleet at every turn. By the time the battle ended, the aliens were in full retreat, their once formidable armada scattered and broken. The aftermath. In the quiet that followed the battle, the Resolute returned to orbit around New Haven. The colony was safe, and the fleet had survived, thanks in large part to the ship no one believed in. Monroe stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars. His crew was exhausted but victorious, their faith in the Resolute vindicated. "Captain," Grant said, stepping up beside him, "we did it." Monroe nodded. "We did, and we proved something important, that sometimes the old ways are the best ways." The Resolute had shown the fleet and the galaxy that being underestimated could be a powerful advantage. It wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a beacon of hope for the future.